Hi, I'm Jesse Hirsh, and welcome to another episode of MetaViews. Recorded live in front of an automated audience, and at the tail end of a heavy snowstorm, Anna Melnikoff and I are going to talk about the rise of conscious evolution. And, you know, Anna, the show's kind of been evolving a little bit over the last few episodes. Partly because I'm kind of finally getting to a point where I'm getting a bit of critical distance, and I'm finally having guests like yourself make repeat performances. So as a result, to highlight the kind of motley crew that I am trying to gather, I'm now using the word correspondence. So, for example, last episode featured my new friend, Jason Willis-Lee, who's based out of Madrid, and he's now our Southern European correspondent. So, Anna, I was wondering if you'd be comfortable with me giving you the title of our psychedelic correspondent, who helps us understand what's going on in the multiple worlds and realities beyond the one that we currently, at this particular moment, perceive.
Let me just sit with that term psychedelic for a minute.
Well, and you can come up. How about this?
Yeah.
We will have our conversation, and at the end of the episode, you can then imagine what kind of correspondent you are, and that will be, you know,
a conscious one, hopefully.
Well, okay, you could be. So, which order is it? Our conscious correspondent, or is it the
evolved?
Okay, I guess we have to have the conversation first to understand the exact configuration.
Probably we should have the conversation first. So I'll see how
because I liked the conscious piece because it worked both ways. It was either the conscious correspondent or the correspondent of consciousness. Both had a nice alliteration that I find very appealing. But as you know, we start off every MetaViews by getting into the news because we like to plug the MetaViews newsletter, a daily Substack. And today's issue is called "The Center is Collapsing," which was a piece I wrote before and after a great chat I had yesterday with our former Media Collective colleague, Avi Lewis, who is now running for the NDP in Vancouver Centre in the upcoming federal election. And while he does have a politician's hat compared to the media hat he used to wear, wow, what a great conversation it was. So I encourage people to check that out. But, you know, Anna, when it comes to news, we throw to our guest and we say, hey, what have you been paying attention to? What do you think our audience should be paying attention to? And of course, this can be personal news, can be industry news, can be world news, and I suppose it could be cosmic news. So by all means, let us know what you think we should have our eyes on.
Well, in cosmic news, apparently this is a week of extreme astrological significance. So we'll just leave it at that. People can figure that out on their own. However much you subscribe to the importance of the alignment of the cosmos. And I would say I guess we're past the Kendrick news now.
Although the glow is still on us.
The glow is still really on, which is great. I love to see it. But I would say the thing I've been paying attention to at the moment is this ridiculousness of the press conference with Elon Musk in the Oval Office with his 5-year-old child muttering under his breath, "You're not the real president." Like, out of the mouths of babes, that is the part that just tickles me. That this child is there speaking truth, and the expressions. It's just such a farce. The other thing that really blew my mind this week was I have a subscription to Ground News, so it's a pretty good unbalanced source for information, or balanced rather. It gives you the relative biases of where all the information is coming from. But the thing that really blew my mind is that Donald Trump now has his highest rating ever. Yeah. And I'm asking myself, why? Like, we've been watching this slow motion coup developing, and what is it? Are people feeling sorry for him or something? I don't get it. It's
No,
mystifying to me.
it's the grift,
Oh,
right? That
this is what I'm wondering. Is this a completely manufactured statistic and story because it's being
no,
reported evenly through all sources?
no, I'm afraid the sentiment is legitimate, but to your point about why, it's the grift is successful, right? The
Yeah.
lying, the bullying, the clowning, right? Because he is a trickster. He is a kind of, a recent MetaViews episode, we had a guy who together we coined the phrase the trickster in chief, right? Because he does kind of embody that archetype in a very a multiplicitous way. But I think his grift is working on a lot of people who, unlike yourself, don't go to a website that illustrates bias, but instead don't even question bias, right? It's just entertaining to them. And the phrase that I keep coming back to is he is the anti-establishment establishment, right? Because he makes people think that he is the rebel, even though he's actually helping the rich get richer at a scale that is unprecedented. I hope that this approval rating is temporary because the price increases, the hardship that will be felt by a lot of people who currently support him may change their minds, but it is disturbing, to your point. Although, to bring it back to your high note, I loved that kid in the Oval Office. And I also thought, I couldn't tell, I watched a few versions of it, that he also told Trump to shut the fuck up, right?
He did indeed. Yes, he did.
And to
Clearly,
your
he's been paying
point,
attention to the adults around him.
yes, that's the dark side of that. But
Yeah.
from the mouth of babes, right? The extent to which there was that, someone calling the emperor naked, to go back to that other kind of old tale. It was encouraging, and I hope to the point of the approval rating, it starts to change. Perhaps to the point of our aspiring title today, that the consciousness of what's happening will evolve, so that people can start recognizing what many of us see plain as day. And Anna, the reason I also started by sort of alluding that you were a correspondent is, when we talk, I'm also thinking about the next time you come on, because I do want to develop the ability to like pull up that video on the fly so we could play it. Because
Excellent.
I just watched a TikTok that I'm going to post in a future Substack of a guy just talking to the Democratic Party going, what the fuck's going on? Like, what do you want us to do? Write a letter to our Congress people? You're our fucking Congress people. Get off your ass and fight this motherfucking thing. And again, it was that sentiment that I found also reassuring. That brings us to our second segment of Every MetaViews, WTF, or What's the Future? So, Anna, what do you see on the event horizon? Near term or long term, right? We tend to be open-ended when we ask people to give us their perspective on the future, but we do like to ground our conversation, the kind of MetaViews experiment, in a kind of futurist practice where we say to our guest, what should our audience be paying attention to under our slogan that nothing's inevitable, provided you are willing to pay attention?
Well, what should we be paying attention to? There's just so much going on right now. I would say maybe pay attention to the money flows in the world and what's going on in the financial scene, because that's going to give you the clearest picture of what exactly is going on in a material sense. Because, I mean, that's been the goal of all of this machination since time immemorial, really. But it's just become very obvious and transparent, and we can follow along by monitoring the stock market, for example, or whatever. Just to be able to get a sense of, okay, so who is getting rich in this economy, and where is that money going, and is it flowing in or out of our country or other countries, and how is that working? So and just, pay attention to how that has an influence on how the political scene is leaning in these moments.
Well, and it reminds me of one of my favorite Dylan lines, that money doesn't talk, it swears. And if
Yeah.
if if you want to find some truth in media, you go to the business pages, because that's where they don't really color it. In fact, almost all the hardcore communists I know love the Financial Times of London, because it actually reports the news, to your point, in the full brazen language of capital and money and wealth. So you do get a sense of what's actually happening, because they don't mince words, because it's entre nous. They think that they're speaking amongst themselves, and that none of the people, none of the rabble are actually reading it. I think part of my concern with the future, and we talked about this in the last episode, is whether we're nearing a point where there's a risk that the future dies, that people's hope, that people's desire to live a better life starts to become drowned by the fear, the anxiety, the doubt, the uncertainty that seems to be on the horizon. And so that's why I think it is important that we try to imagine better futures, or, to your point, that we try to imagine the tools by which we can make sense of this present and chart that better future. Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you think that there is, not amongst ourselves, but amongst the general population, that there could be a death or near death of the future?
I absolutely think that. I think that we're at a real decision point right now. There's a large proportion of the population that is poorly educated, marginally literate, and their main exposure to media is just, the shallowest of entertainment, reality television. And these are the people who are easily manipulated to vote for somebody like a Donald Trump or other populists, because they are not really paying attention to what's going on around them. And so, this is the emerging idiocracy. And if you're familiar with that film,
Yeah.
it's really happening. Not just the idiocracy, but oh God, what was that Disney film with the little robot?
Wally?
Wall-E. That particular future as well, quite interesting. On many levels, this is also happening in humanity. On the physical level, the way that we, on the physical and mental level, have let ourselves go, and there's been no attention paid to any aspect of our spiritual or emotional levels, because the emotional stuff, that's considered the province of female kind of stuff. And of course, we've been living in patriarchy for 3,500 years now. So anything that has any kind of feminine aspect to it is considered not worthy of note. And this is to our detriment, because we function on all of these levels. We function on a mental level. Sure, that's part of how we function. But our emotional level and our spiritual level are equally important, and the physical level as well. All of that has to be in balance in order for us to be a complete, functioning, fully conscious human being.
Yeah.
Being in touch with our spiritual experience that we're having here, or is it that we are a spirit having a human experience here? That's the question, right? And it depends how you approach that, what you end up prioritizing. And it also depends on how you've been educated and what you've been exposed to and how you've been brought up. Yeah. So the way that, and of course, the fact that we are deficient in a lot of these areas is entirely due to this oligarchy, this concentration of wealth, and that sort of colonial structure, oppressive structure of human civilization that we have been functioning under, that has dominated the construct of human civilization for the last however many thousands of years.
Yeah. Although, as I'm sure you would agree, where the exception to that rule is in many indigenous societies.
Yes.
right? Where outside of
And
the colonial kind of projects, there were the matrilineal, there were alternate
yeah.
ways of organizing and understanding the world. That,
And what happened to all of them?
yeah,
So fortunately, we are at a place where a lot of that wisdom and that lineages of information are at least somewhat recoverable. People are making an effort to
yeah,
reclaim their indigenous histories and their knowledge and their wisdom and their experience of what it takes to make a functional, peaceful, sustainable society.
yeah,
Because a lot of, let's face it, a lot of the indigenous societies anywhere in the world that have been absorbed by Western civilization, absorbed and or nearly wiped out, they all were living sustainably before we came along. And well, we, loosely speaking, because I don't really claim membership in that
yeah. I was going
in
to say,
any
I
particular
think
level.
we've both burned up our membership cards
Yeah,
quite a
yeah.
while ago, and
I'm in on a fake membership card right now.
but you know, to your point, I've spent a lot of time in the last half decade, in particular, really thinking about what the colonialization of knowledge means, and the
Yeah,
way in which our education system, especially in North America, is still a process of colonializing knowledge rather than what we would envision, which is more knowledge sharing, knowledge discovery, knowledge remixing, right? Like allowing knowledge to be more freely controlled. Whereas you know, and part of this is just the experience I had with the media industry, that we have a very still colonizing approach to knowledge, which determines some things legit, other things not legit, and the basis by which that happened can be problematic. Now, granted, the fascists are capitalizing, you know, on the reaction to that. Like they've swung in the exact opposite direction. That you have the people first who tried to control truth, and then flip, you got the people who are saying, fuck it, let's just kill truth and we'll just make shit up. And you don't have what I want, which is the middle ground, which is negotiated truth, right?
yeah,
Which is a much more open, community, scientific approach to understanding the universe and sharing that knowledge freely, right? Without restriction, without copyright, without the, you know, bullshit that the colonial system places. We digress because I really want to bring this into our feature conversation, partly because you were going there, as it were, in terms of what you were describing in terms of the future. And in particular, I thought you evoked, in my words, a kind of learning curve, right? That you started with, you know, there's a lot of people who, you know, are semi-literate or who haven't had access to education, and they perhaps are the most vulnerable to Trump's grift, right? And Musk's lies. But at the same time, I feel culturally, given how long you and I have been alive in this particular iteration on this planet, that there is a change, that there is a growing awareness, that we are perhaps on the cusp of an evolution in consciousness. And for, you know, I use three pillars or three themes to kind of structure my feature conversation. And in our case, I've picked vibes, consciousness, and collective action. And I wanted to start with vibes because I kind of feel it's an on ramp. Like
yeah.
I think the way,
That's perfect. That's perfect
please,
because
yeah,
what I was going to start talking about is that you know we so you've described it all perfectly in sort of the from the intellectual approach. Now, from the vibrational approach, we are vibrational beings. We function on frequency. Like wild animals don't just sense things and have instincts because they're thinking about it. They don't think about it in an intellectual sense in the way that we do. They sense things. They extend their senses and they have a vibrational awareness of their surroundings that is extremely precise. And so do we when we pay attention to that. And the thing is that with that intellectual emphasis of Western civilization, Western culture, and the deliberate, basically, denigration of all other forms of knowledge, we've prioritized only one way of looking at things. And by minimizing the importance of, say, the emotional etherics and the spiritual functioning of how we function as a species, it makes it really easy for people to become manipulated by fear. And fear is a wavelength. So when you have a sort of mob effect in a crowd where people all flip into a place of violence and fighting, that is a function of wavelength and frequency, in the same way that, when birds are flying in a flock and they all turn direction at the same time. We function that way as well, but we pretend that we don't.
And if I get just interject with a quick personal example, you may or may not know that I am now a herdsman, in the sense that I have a goat herd, I have horses, we had sheep for a while, and it is a phenomenal experience of collective consciousness
Yeah.
to be part of that vibe, right? To be hooked into their senses, they're hooked into my senses, right? And it is a really quite phenomenal that is lost to people who are not living with herds, right? With
Well, and
flocks.
exactly, and this is part of the issue with the collective experience in an urban, condensed, technological environment that is intellectually focused. You're living next to nature, you're working with herds, you're observing how everything is interconnected, you're feeling that, you're sitting in the vibration of that. In the city, it is absolute chaos. And if you don't actually, for example, if you're a farmer, you're going to be working and you're going to be exercising your body. You don't need to go to a gym. But if you're in the city and you don't have access to all that, well, then you better be doing some form of exercise, because your body's going to break down otherwise. And this is a very common problem in our urbanized environment, where people don't have to do the kind of physical labor that they used to. So by the same token, the way that we use our minds also needs to be exercised. And it's not. It's mostly just manipulated. It's over-focused on the intellect, and then those people who have that vested interest in manipulating a large part of the population manipulate us by means of fear and hatred,
Well,
dividing.
and let's also acknowledge, a lot of people are just numbing it right out, right? This
Yes.
this is why, addiction is so pervasive in North America, as it has been historically, often around the world. Because if people are overwhelmed, if they're not given space to have that spiritual, that emotional, because their work conditions suck, their living conditions suck, they're going to numb it out, right? And, to your point, it's a use it or lose it proposition when it comes to how you're exercising your brain and how it connects.
Absolutely. So, in a small indigenous community, if you had a member of the community who was obviously exhibiting signs of addiction, which is an illness, the community would address it. The way that the community is structured and functions as a whole unit, there would be built-in mechanisms of, people care about each other. They know each other. They're not together in a group that's so big that you just don't know anybody. And this doesn't really happen in the city. So addiction goes unchecked, and it's just considered normal now. And you just don't have that in small indigenous groups of population where they understand that, to have a successful functioning society, everybody has to be functional.
Yeah.
You can't be supporting a bunch of people who are just functioning from addiction or functioning from fear, or who are constantly in a place of just sheer survival. And again, when you're in survival all the time, so that's what poverty does, you're going to be functioning from fear.
Well, and you alluded to something earlier, which, I used as an opportunity to talk about the herd, but I want to bring it back, that one of the things I've experienced in immersing myself and, quite frankly, smoking a joint and hanging out with my herd so often, is that there is human equivalence, right? That often humans are part of a herd as humans and exhibit herd mentality. Your point about a large group becoming violent is one example. I think sports is another obvious example. Music can provide this. But it makes me think that because humans don't really live with animals as much, they don't recognize how much they are also like animals when they are with other humans. But to your point, they don't understand it, so they're easily manipulated, right? They
Yeah.
easily fall prey to that dynamic. Do you want to elaborate or unpack that a little?
Well, when you're functioning from a vibration like fear, you're concerned with either fight, flight, freeze, or fawn responses. So you're either going to run, you're going to get aggressive, you're going to numb out and disconnect, or you're going to join the oppressors and try and please them so that they will be nice to you, hopefully, which never works out in the end. But people keep doing it because they don't have an expanded awareness. They're not functioning from a vibration or a frequency that is conducive to a broader analysis or a bigger picture analysis. So when you're functioning from the frequency of love, which is a top of the line frequency, honestly, it's the best frequency to be functioning from all the time if you can. We all have that experience. Hopefully, most of us have that experience of being able to tune into a frequency of love.
Mm-hmm.
And when you engage with the universe, with the totality of existence, with that frequency, what happens is you set up a feedback loop. And that frequency can be maintained because the universe is infinite. So there is therefore an infinite amount of love frequency available to tap into for anybody who wants to do that.
And that to me is the beauty of my herd, is that I give them food, they love the food, they love me, I feel that love, I give that love back, I give them more food, and it is this kind of endless cycle, which is bliss, right? It
It's
is
a
literal
wonderful teaching
bliss.
tool. It's a wonderful teaching tool.
Yeah.
And what humanity has done is we've gone past the teaching tools that the earth has already provided us. And we've decided we're going to invent all our own technology and teaching tools, thinking, as we always do, we know better. We're so smart. Well, I mean, we are pretty smart. We are very, very smart monkeys, and we've invented a whole lot of clutter on this planet, a lot of which is useless, and a lot of which has kind of subverted our natural tendency to function from a place of love. When we're in small, sustainable, balanced communities, it's really easy to maintain a love frequency because life can be beautiful when you're in balance. But when you're in an urban environment where there's millions of people, there's poverty, you've got to fight and struggle for your very existence, and you're constantly watching for cues of how do I behave to make sure I can maintain my belonging, which is a false sense of safety, because what are you belonging to? You're belonging to this parasitic entity that has been stealing from you your entire life. It's been stealing your energy, your focus, your ability to create, your potential, your energy, flat out. And that's what colonial structure does.
And to bring it back to our kind of our meta view for the day in terms of whether we're seeing a rise amidst the fall, this is where I'm getting a little bit of encouragement at the way in which the word vibes are starting to be used in the culture, and the way in which they're starting to, again, not just change a shift in perception and consciousness, but action. Because I keep hearing people say, oh, the vibes are off, let's get out of here.
Yeah.
Right? And you almost want to elevate that up to capitalism. Oh, the vibes are off. Let's get out of here.
The vibes have been off for a long time. And to that point, I just want to point out that the melanated community of everywhere has been functioning from that vibes perspective for a long time. I've spent a lot of time in West Africa, and it is a very different cultural approach. And although, yes, there is a sort of an overbearing colonial influence from the perspective of the original culture, the traditional culture, they're coming from that animist perspective, that recognition that all life is interconnected,
Yes.
all life is sacred. There's consciousness interwoven into everything, and so they maintain a very open vibrational awareness in their culture. And that has translated to, the African American culture. So what we saw, that performance at the Super Bowl with Kendrick, and that brilliant performance. I don't know if there were a whole host of people in the background that nobody would have been aware of doing energy work.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and one of the words that I heard was that was a portal opening to people who recognize and understand that sort of thing.
But even
Energetically, that is an opening of potential, because what's happened there by use of not only linguistic presentation, the artistic presentation, the levels of symbolism and meaning, the linguistic cues that specifically triggered certain emotions in certain groups of people, was absolutely brilliantly orchestrated, and a brilliant example of how to mobilize collective consciousness for action.
yeah, and to
That
your
was
point,
revolution music.
and to your point about the portal, it created a new future. It created a vision of a
Yeah,
future that before that performance, I think most people were not able to see, right? Because,
yeah,
because of the nature of Trump, because of the nature of corporate America, and the Super Bowl is usually the peak of their power, of how they express that power in terms of attention and ritual and symbol. So to have him do this counter ceremony is incredibly powerful, and I think inspiring for a lot of people. So,
yeah.
you know,
And just a recognition that, yeah, right under their noses,
yeah,
this happened, and most of
yeah.
them didn't recognize that.
Well,
And
and that's the defiance too,
yeah,
right? Of where everyone else in the media is bowing to him, and finding a way, to your point, try to appease the bully when fundamentally it'll never work. This was outright defiance and rebellion
yeah.
on a very powerful scale. So it allows me to segue to the consciousness piece, because that was, to your point, a consciousness raising event, right?
Yeah.
And even transformationally so. So, we've been talking about kind of vibes and frequency, and you've been talking about it in a sense of oppression, right? That this is stuff that's been, outside of Black communities, this has been stuff that's been denied us and suppressed, and is a danger and a threat to the colonial exercise. To what extent is that changing, right? To what extent is this consciousness rising to the point that it is now potentially challenging the constraints, the prisons, the atrophication of mental abilities, that our current system fosters?
Well, it's a good question. I think that what is happening is that there are groups throughout humanity collectively that are learning and developing or studying systems of metaphysical spiritual development that are not constrained by any kind of religious dogma. Um, you know, I think we talked last time about how the various big jumps in human civilization have been mostly focused on external technological aspects. And so throughout that whole period of history, every time a new religion would appear, there would be a little brief flourishing of sort of renaissance of spirituality, and then the religious dogma would set in, and it would become part of another oppressive system. And that has repeated throughout humanity. There hasn't been
I
this
mean,
ability to retain or to stay true to what the actual spiritual necessity of action is,
to your
what it
point,
is.
it's true politically as well,
Yeah,
right? Like they certainly are two sides of the same coin of expression, discovery, decentralization, then followed by the conquering and consolidation and appropriation of kind of what was originally there. But please continue.
yeah. Well, I think that we need to. Um, well, there has to be a shift in educational focus to begin with, um, and so the fact that we don't really we don't really teach accurate history. It's always being presented from the perspective of the conquerors. Whoever won whatever battle, you're only going to get their history, and the more focused they are in that oppressive type of power, the more extreme the historical censorship is going to get. And
Can
that's what we're seeing in real time right now. Is happening in front of us.
can I indulge you in a quick little tangent? So, just to reveal my own crazy thinking, my current conspiracy theory that I both easily discard but am obsessed with is that the Roman Empire didn't exist, that it was fabricated by the Catholic Church to create its own authority. An empire did exist that was now called the Roman Empire, and it was Greek. The entire thing was Greek. It was based on a Hellenic civilization. There's very little archaeological evidence that distinguishes the Roman Empire from previous Greek civilizations and empire. And all of the literature was created or translated by the medieval Catholic Church. And why would we trust the Catholic Church? So
That's a very good point.
yeah, anyway, I digress. But to your
But
point,
that's
our
a perfect
educational
example
Yeah.
of how history is altered. So there are many tales that are told of history that we later find out are wrong. I love the whole story of Medusa, about how she's this horrific monster. But when you actually find out the origin story, that she was raped by Poseidon and then punished for being the victim of a rape by being turned into this monster, well, it gives you a different perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
It's the
I
same
grew
way
up
that
reading a lot of Greek mythology, and man, some of those mythological archetypes are extremely problematic, but it is very educational to be educated and aware in cosmological history of different cultures.
Yeah.
Because, and I don't see why we don't have, that's really interesting for children. I loved reading about different fairy tales and mythology and archetypal stuff as a kid. I had a bunch of those books.
But to your
So
point,
it's easy to get kids interested in that stuff so that they develop a literacy and a comprehension of what different cultural symbols and archetypes and what those dynamics might portend for how the stories of our future might unfold.
But to your point, comparative education, right? Allowing education to exist outside of the ideology that's driving it is very dangerous, right? Because
to the dominant ideology.
Oh,
yes.
Totally, because it fosters creative thinking. It fosters critical thinking. And one of the examples that I always love to cite is, the Rasta explanation of Moses on Zion, speaking to God, is he wasn't talking to the burning bush. He burnt the bush. Like, you tell people that Moses went up the mountain, found a bush, rolled that bush up and smoked it, and then talked to God. That is a far more compelling common sense explanation. Any Jewish kid that heard that would go, what? Yeah, okay, I believe that. And then all of a sudden you lost them.
I mean, this is again, when you're reading scripture and recognize, okay, well, originally it was written in Aramaic, and then translated to ancient Hebrew, and then to ancient Greek, and then to Latin, and then to Old English, and then to English. At every level of translation, you lost a bunch of meaning, and there were cultural biases imposed.
Political agendas.
Absolutely, 100%. I don't know if you've heard that original Lord's Prayer directly translated from Aramaic. The Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, etc. We used to have to say it every day when I was in school growing up. When you translate from the original Aramaic, it reads like a vibrational meditation. O cosmic birther of radiance, source of all radiance and vibration, soften the grounds of our being. I don't remember exactly how it goes, but it reads like a vibrational meditation. Mm-hmm. There's no assumed gender. It just talks about vibration and power and the construction of our reality.
Yeah.
So it's got a very absolute recognition of a direct connection to the existence of all things. And this is why I love reading random writings of theoretical physicists, because they have a really beautiful way of expressing the nature of reality, of talking about how does it actually really function. let's not, impose kind of personification of deities and all of that kind of bullshit on there. Let's just look at it from a very absolute perspective. And how does that actually function? How do we function in this physical reality? What makes us have this consciousness? And what happens to that consciousness after the body dies? What's going on here? Do we even understand what our mission is here? Is this whole plane of existence just a big teaching tool?
Yeah.
For us to evolve on a spiritual level.
To go back to kind of the transformation I've had here on the farm, and this is not news to you and the folks you chill with, but I'm for sure talking to trees and they're talking to me. And, this idea, not only that all animals are sentient, all plants are sentient, right? We just do not necessarily live or perceive existence in a way that they can understand us. But I hang out with some of my trees long enough. I shouldn't say my trees because they're trees. They're not mine. I hang out with the trees I live around. They hang out with me and we vibe, right? In a way that, like, I used to try to do in High Park, and maybe it was sort of possible because High Park's a pretty grand park, or in the ravines, by the Don Valley there. But again, to your earlier point, it makes me wonder, how did we lose this, right? How and we've talked about the how, but to bring it back to this point of consciousness, do you feel it's coming back? Right? Do you feel amongst the people that you are around, that you connect with, because they certainly are more at the forefront of this kind of transformation, but even amongst the general population, do you feel a change is afoot? Do you feel the vibes changing and more people tuning into the frequency?
The vibes. I do notice that Gen Z and younger, in particular, are using a lot more language that is sort of vibrational in approach. They seem to have a much more sort of general awareness of vibrational concepts that are more incorporated into their collective consciousness than sort of mainstream white supremacist culture that existed, in the last 100 years. I think there has been quite a big shift, and I believe that it is entered a broader slice of the public collective consciousness in a way that might actually tip the balance in a positive direction. I'm hopeful for that, because what happens is that when there's a certain density or concentration of low enough vibration, this is very, very simple general terms, but from a strictly physics sense, when you have humans living in cities in unhealthy conditions that are damaging to our full being on a spiritual, emotional, on every level, really, it's like that experiment that they did with rats, building those rat cities, and then they ended up all cannibalizing each other and becoming perverted and dying out.
Nightmare. Yeah.
This is if we don't choose to consciously evolve to address, okay, these are the problems, and look at what is literally happening, is that there is a concentration of low negative vibration. Mm-hmm. So a concentration of fear, survival, and that has been artificially created by those that control the construct of our civilization.
And amplified.
And so this is analogous to, in a physical human body, a cancerous tumor that eats up all of the resources of your body so that it can grow bigger and bigger and eventually kill you. Mm-hmm. This is what is happening in our civilization. We have allowed certain cancerous tumors in energetics to proliferate, and we have willfully chosen to not recognize them as such. We have, in fact, been tricked into believing that this is just the status quo. It's been normalized. We've even been tricked into admiring the people who run all of that stuff because they're wealthy and powerful.
And that's why I hate the word normal. Right? Because I again and again, and it wasn't until I got older, to the extent to which I saw that the word is a weapon, and the word is used as a weapon, not so much to protect people, but to hurt people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, to make the state of sickness entrenched, normal, right?
Well,
When we
the
should be
biggest
embracing
fear,
weirdness. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, the biggest fear, and again, this has to do with collective trauma. So if you look throughout the history of humanity, we have generational trauma, whatever happens within individual families. I mean, that varies from family to family, but there's no question that everybody comes up against some form of trauma, abandonment, um, fear for their lives. They might be in terror. You know, when you're a baby and you're helpless, just about anything can feel like a life and death threat. If you don't feel, and of course, babies, when they're first born, all they do is function vibrationally. They just radiate love. Uh, and until they're shown something different, that is their default setting. This is the default setting of humanity.
All
To
animals.
connect to all of us, yeah.
Yeah.
To connect
But I mean,
and
all
to
animals.
radiate that love.
Like it's remarkable, like a baby goat, right? Or a baby pig, or any of them. They are identical. They radiate love until they know otherwise.
Yeah, and there's this instinctive seeking for connection. And then what happens is that those people who have been generationally broken in that trusting and openness of seeking connection who were then assaulted. For example, sexual abuse in humanity is at an all-time high. I mean,
Well,
it's never really changed, but the
but
exposure
on
of
that
it is at
point,
an all-time high.
to circle back to the people who, and I'm hypothesizing here, but I feel it's a safe hypothesis, to go back to the people who currently approve of Trump, and the reason he has a high approval rating. Amongst a lot of the MAGA crowd, there is a lot of trauma and there's a lot of pain. And in
Yes.
particular, they focus on conspiracies that deal with pedophilia, sexual child abuse, and to me, it just speaks that that has happened to them, that they have traumas, that they are stuck in these cycles of abuse, and he is an abuser who is lying to them, and on the one hand trying to promise that he will help them with this, but on the other hand he's perpetuating those cycles. So
Yeah.
that's why I very much think that your analysis here
Well,
is quite astute.
absolutely. The when there is a prevalence of generational trauma that involves sexual abuse, and we already know there's been a ton of exposure within the Catholic Church to begin with.
Yeah.
But whenever you have societies that begin to isolate family units behind closed doors, a whole lot of shenanigans can happen.
Yeah.
You know, in indigenous societies where you have an entire village raising a child, everything is pretty out in the open. So there's a lot more transparency. You don't get away with shit like that. And when you are in a smaller indigenous society that functions from a level of awareness and connection within their community, and a recognition of the necessity of having a functional, every member of the society needs to be cherished for whoever they are and whatever they can contribute, their uniqueness. You know, you don't let something like that slide in a society like that. That doesn't, here it's almost like it's sort of blasé about, oh yeah, that's our weird Uncle Nick. Don't let him sit in a room with your kids alone or anything like that. Like as if that's just
Well,
whatever,
normal, right? That comes
No,
back to that word
exactly.
normal, right?
Normal. And
Rather than
so
saying, "Hey, this isn't normal. Or this isn't acceptable. We got to do something about it."
this is how they get in, though, because when we talk about normal being used as a weapon, the way it gets in is that anybody who has that kind of generational wavelength of abuse on them, their biggest need is to try to connect with their abuser, to try to retell that story in a way that gives them a more positive outcome.
Yeah.
So they're really seeking for a sense of belonging. They really want to reach for that connection. But they're reaching from it from the perspective emotionally of a broken child.
Yeah.
So from an emotional age of maybe 2 or 3, or whenever the abuse might have started, it could have even been younger. And that is unfortunately, especially with children who can't talk, who are they going to tell? What are they going
and
to tell? And
and
who's going to
difficult
believe
for
them?
them to process as well.
And yet we do know that this
Yeah.
happens. It's really
So
common in humanity. And so what happens is, by creating this standard of normal and the way that they're manipulated by fear, they're already used to that.
yeah,
That's already one of their big trigger functions.
yeah,
And so now they respond to the idea of being assimilated into this group as, oh, I get to belong.
yeah. So
And they
let
get
me
to
use
be with
that.
other people who are in the same emotional wavelength.
Let me use that to stitch together a few key points you've made today, quite brilliantly, if you don't mind me saying so. The belonging piece, I think, is really important, because the consequence of the capitalist society, of the colonialization of social relationships, is that we are in a pandemic of loneliness, right? We are increasingly isolated, but at the same time, we're identifying, especially in young people, a real aptitude for frequency, for understanding, feeling the vibes, and I would argue even a potential for greater consciousness. It strikes me that collective action here is both the answer and the manifestation. And you, last
Yes.
time you were on, used the phrase American Spring, and I've been using it ever since. And I've been using it as one of the themes here in MetaViews, where I keep, trying to both anticipate it, manifest it, but help people understand that thread and how it's playing out. So my question is this: how do you see the correlation between the increase in consciousness, the potential of an American Spring, the opportunity for collective action, but most importantly, the need for belonging? And how this can, because to your point, I think MAGA, I think QAnon, I think Trump is offering people a false sense of belonging. And if there's no other alternatives out there, they're going, yeah, I want to feel like I'm with the bully. I want to feel like I'm with the abuser. I want an opportunity to do it better this time. So how do
So
we center that?
they feel safer.
Yeah.
They feel safer. And what happens on a, I almost want to say mechanical level, it's not really mechanical, but when you're dealing with electromagnetic dysfunction, let's just say. So when you're functioning from a place of generational trauma, there's an impact on your electromagnetic systems, like a scar or a place of static where certain things are, clingy, or it's not your electromagnetic. It's like if you look at the diagram of the electromagnetics of the planet, you see the different magnetic belts and so on. We have those as well, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But when you are traumatized, there are weak spots. It's like holes in the ozone of our electromagnetics, for example, where stuff gets in. And the thing is, we all have free will. And so a person who is caught in one of those dynamics where they're functioning from a place of fear, until or unless they choose to embrace a higher vibration and have a realization that will, on an electromagnetic level, release the electromagnetics of that trauma. So this is partly how vibrational healing functions. When you have an awareness of a specific energetic dynamic, like an emotional wound, a traumatic wound to the spirit, the person, in order to heal, has to have that moment of realization, of really getting deep into the feeling. You can't deny that you had that experience of terror or that grief of abandonment. And until you acknowledge the reality that, yeah, you are on a spiritual level grieving from that place of the emotionally wounded and abandoned young child, you can't get past that until you acknowledge that it's there, and
Mm-hmm.
that it is real, and that it existed, and that you are broken, or at least you're really hurting because of it.
Mm-hmm.
But people
And
don't want to admit that. They want to try and control and stuff down the emotions, and we don't talk about it.
yeah, and just to spell it out, and you can correct me if you feel I'm wrong. Emotions are themselves a form of frequency, which
Yeah,
themselves are a form of motion, right?
yeah,
And in sort of understanding and growing one's awareness. And to your earlier, you started off our episode with a perfectly legitimate dig on men's capacity for emotions and emotional understanding. And certainly as a man who was born in the 70s, I can confirm that we were absolutely abandoned when it came to emotional literacy, emotional capability, emotional function. At worst, we were abused for it. At best, we were scolded for it. But it has been younger generations that, for me, have allowed me, as I've aged, to prioritize my emotions and to, embark on the learning curve that a lot of men have to embark on in terms of understanding what those frequencies are, what those emotions are, where they're coming from, why you're having them, so that you don't avoid them, you don't suppress them, you don't fear them, you let them happen. And you experience
yeah.
them and learn from them and learn in part what happened to you when you were younger, because shit happens to all of us when we were younger.
Well, and it's not even just what happened to you when you were younger. It's what happened to all of humanity on a collective level
Yes.
when we made the decision to abandon the goddess.
Yeah.
And when that happened in human history,
Or I would alter that and say
it was during a period of the cultures that enacted that conquering upon those goddess worshipping civilizations that existed all around the Mediterranean basin.
Yeah.
And to an extent all over the world.
Can I make
Let me just finish this thought here. These civilizations that did the conquering were coming in from a position of fear and scarcity.
Yeah.
They came into a civilization of abundance, and their first thought was, let's conquer this. Not to try and open communication to see if they could maybe share or learn how to live like that.
Yeah.
But to conquer, because their only perspective was fear and scarcity.
And Canadians,
so they were coming from nomadic societies. And so what has happened since the advent of patriarchy is this has upended the natural flow of energy dynamics, which, the yin and the yang. The yin is often considered the feminine. It's not about it being feminine, but it is about that creative principle.
So
the wellspring of that creative principle. And the yang is the physical expression of that. But you don't have a physical expression if you don't honor the wellspring to begin with.
So I got to interrupt because I want to walk you back.
Okay.
Partly because where fundamentally I agree with you, I disagree with the narrative you're using because I feel it gives too much power to the patriarchy. It gives too much power to the conquerors. It inadvertently legitimizes their activities when your intent, my desire, is to condemn them. And that's where instead of using the word abandon the goddess, I would suggest ignore. Because I would argue that you would not be here today if it wasn't for that goddess. Right? We would not be here today if it wasn't for that goddess. And I think where we succumb to the language of those victorious historians is that we grant them a power they do not possess. Right?
And look, what actually happened is that we forgot.
Although this is why I say ignore, because to your point about those traumas deep inside of us, we don't forget those traumas, because even if we're not aware of them, we still carry them with us. And they impact our behavior, they impact our emotions. And that's why, to go back to your Tao example, these things are always there. They manifest through us. The question is whether we are conscious of them. And
well, clearly
that's
not,
where ignore and attention.
We've been functioning from this patriarchal dynamic for thousands of years now in human history, and it is dysfunctional. Yes. It's not how reality works.
Yeah.
It is not how reality works. Power is not control. They are two different concepts.
Yes.
And humanity has been confused about that for thousands of years.
Yes.
Power is having a civilization where everyone lives in abundance, where everyone is cherished and is belonging.
Yeah.
Where nobody has to be in fear or survival.
Yeah.
And we're fully capable of creating that for ourselves.
And to your point,
so why haven't we?
I would also argue, and I don't want to get into this because I do have to wrap up because I have a tiny bladder and my back teeth are singing anchors away. But I also think control is an illusion. And that is part of the myth of the colonizers, is that they not only seek control, they offer control to whoever's corrupt enough to, buy their myth. But it's all, they never actually achieve control. And the pursuit of control, like the desire to have a lawn that is fenced off, that is a monocrop, that you mow and you spray pesticides on so that you've this blank green canvas, right? That is the metaphor of trying to control nature, and it never works. The dandelions always come back. So the last point I kind of wanted you to get to weigh in on this collective action is, is this something that, to put us into the futurist lens, what is the timeline? Your evocation of the Kendrick Lamar ceremony, my words, was really quite powerful. And the same way that I felt that opened up a future that wasn't possible before that, you really inspired me last time with this American Spring evocation. So do what is your sense? What is your extended senses telling you about the potential for collective action in the near term, given to where we started, this alarming approval rate that needs to be countered?
Well, I know for a fact that starting this Saturday, I'm going to be in 10 days of my annual meditation retreat with a group of about 300 other vibrational healer, practitioner, metaphysicians. And so I know that collectively we're planning on doing a whole lot of pretty powerful work. I know we're not the only group who does this kind of thing. There are other groups who, like, as I said, I have friends who were actively involved while that halftime show was going on in doing energy work to reinforce the shift of consciousness that was brought about there. There are a lot of ways of looking at how reality functions. And what we're looking for is a tipping point. We want to have a societal tipping point where enough people are able to tune into the frequency that it gets rid of that negative, lower, heavier vibration. So literally blast it out of existence. So it's like, a lower, heavier vibration in the presence of a higher vibration is going to get dissipated. They can't coexist. However, when there is enough of that concentration of that heaviness, that darkness, which literally it is in terms of, we're talking about degrees of how close it is to physical matter. So it's becoming solid, right? There's a reason why our language works the way it is, and the syntax of how we describe being in this physical state of matter as being somehow being sinful. It's not that we're sinful, it's that we're in a physical state of matter where we are capable of actually creating these vibrations and holding them in our physical form. And that is an effective tool and method of holding off the negative impacts of those kinds of fear vibrations. And so, like, just for example, West African culture. I've been studying and playing West African djembe for a couple of decades now, almost 3 decades now, traveling to West Africa. The whole purpose of that is to create a frequency of joy within their communities so that people can dance and celebrate together,
Mm-hmm.
and to recognize that there is joy in living and being present in the moment. And so it's very hard to bring down people who have incorporated a practice that cultivates joy in your frequency at all times. And I mean, we're having an epidemic of depression. It would be really good for people to understand how to access the frequency of joy in their physical bodies. But instead, we medicate them, which doesn't give them any tools or any possibility to learn how to build that muscle.
Well, I personally recommend animals.
Animals are a great way.
Yes. And to your
Even
point,
just one pet.
Yes. I one of my most enlightened, I don't know if this is the right word, one of my most vibrational moments was with Allen Ginsberg, shortly before his death, in the appropriately named Constipation Hall at the University of Toronto, and he just chanted. It was just him chanting, and I tripped balls. Like, it was like his aura was so bright, and it was a tremendous experience. To your point, in terms of we need more cultural experiences like that, more ways to make it happen.
And yet we don't really support the arts either.
No, not
it's another one of those things that we consider to be, it's not that important.
But collective action. I have the intro music playing only because I genuinely have to go and take a leak. But thank you, Anna. This has been absolutely wonderful. I hope you will come back.
I would love to.
Thoughts on the title of Correspondent that you wanted to assign yourself? To be continued?
Dimensional liaison?
Dimensional liaison. I'm down for that. Dimensional liaison. Okay, we'll have to have you back soon. Okay. Thanks again, Anna. Thanks again, everybody else. MetaViews, published regularly, found on all the socials, on Substack, on everywhere else. And we'll see you soon. All right, take care.